So it is 1 o'clock. This is the time I have set aside from 1 to 5 to make sure you post your opening comments. So I'm thanking everyone for being here today. And we do have Thomas Lynch in the Zoom room. And so if you have not yet posted your opening comment, please do. People still coming in. And I'm going to get ready to send you to a breakout room in about 3 minutes. I'm going to check the comment area and see what that looks like. If it looks roughly like 16 people have added content, I'll say okay. All right, they're still coming in. And right now, you do have the power to unmute yourself. So I'll just go over the Zoom rules. You do have the power to unmute yourself. I'm going to share my screen while people are still coming in so you can just see my tentative agenda. And what I'm looking at. So hopefully you can see my tentative agenda here. So between now and 1:05, there are like 4 more minutes to let the stragglers come in. And hopefully you are posting your opening comments. Gonna send you to a small group to prep. And in that small group time, gonna ask you just to bring everything you have to get warmed up as we come back to the large room. And then we're gonna come back to the large Zoom room and it'll be Mr. Thomas Lynch time. And then we'll have exiting comments. So that's the idea there. I am going to take this off of share. Don't need to share all of that. So that's the idea. I'm going to check the chat room one more time, up to 22 people. All right, lots of happy people to be here. All right, I am going to go ahead. So what's going to happen is, no, I'm going to do this manually. I was going to do it automatically, but then that means Mr. Lynch will get sent to some bonus room and everyone will be like, hey, we got, so no, I'm not going to do that. I'll just send you to these breakout rooms. So I'm going to pause this video because we do not need me setting up that. You should see an invitation, going to be in there for 10 minutes. You'll get about a 30-second warning before we come back over here to get started. So look for your invite. Everyone's going to get an invite. I'm sorry, except for Mr. Lynch. It's going to be you and me.
Oh, cool. Be still my heart. I am now in a state by age and anecdotage whereby I am, as my son says, not retired, but not required. So I can do what I want now. And living up here in this sort of gilded quarantine since March has been a real luxury because the only other thing I do is read and type. And some days the typing achieves a kind of quality that I think of as writing. And it's joyous when that happens. I publish what I write most times. I'm usually working on something that's promised by a certain time. And I would really like to be, it's really nice to be among people who are beginning to sense that they may want to have a voice of their own in this writerly colloquy that goes on between readers and writers. I've often thought that writers are nothing more than readers who sort of go karaoke. They read something that really impresses them and they say, I could do that, or I could do that better. I could do it as well anyway. And it's like sort of being a backbencher in church. You say, I could have said that better. I have a better commentary on, 1 Peter chapter 5. But when you actually have to stand and deliver, it's much harder. That said, I am told by Mursalata that each of you is working on something in your own voice, poetry or story or essay. And because I've committed all three of those cardinal sins and been paid to do it, which is strange, I thought I would avail the opportunity to answer any questions that you might have about, now that I am in my anecdotage, I have some perspective that might assist you. Yeah, I should say in advance, there are no silly questions. Ask away. Somebody's had that question too. You can't hurt my feelings. I've raised teenagers. All that damage is done. And if I don't know the answer, perhaps I can send you to a book where the answer might be gotten, or to a library where there will be a book in which the answer is found. And failing any of that, I'll just make some shit up, because writers do that. That's one of the licenses they give you when they give you your creative license, So work away. I'm going to hush now and wait to hear from you.
Okay, so we're going to do it like, oh, thanks, Jamie Miller. You see, you have participant options, and you can just raise your hand. So I will use that feature. And when you raise your hand, I will unmute you, and then you'll do it that way so that people just aren't unmuting all willy to the nilly. All right, so Jamie, I am, there you go. No.
Okay, there we go. Question. I really hope there are no silly questions. It's not so much about your stories. Like, what was it like trying to, break into being an author? Because I myself am somewhat aspiring.
Well, of course, you have to disabuse yourself of the constant voice inside you that says you're a fraud, not good enough. And reading won't help you with that, because most times when we read, we're reading people's best dish. They don't bring their second best casserole to the funeral luncheon. They always bring the best dish they have. And that's why funeral luncheons are such a good place to do your dining. But it's also why the library is such a good place to do your reading, because if it's made it into the library, it's probably been field tested by a lot of people. But once you have convinced yourself that you could do that, and you're willing to put up with all the rejection that comes with such a presumption, then you have become a writer in a sense. The other thing, of course, is you got to clack out a few thousand words every now and then. Otherwise, people just think you're a poser. But I have found writers mostly talk to themselves. They carry on an ongoing conversation with themselves, and as long as they don't move their lips in public, people leave them alone. But you are having a conversation with your idea of that perfect reader. Oftentimes, someone that you wish would read everything you wrote, and never will, I promise. But, they're good to be the soundboard for you, So I think that's the first thing, assuming that you can. And every time someone says, no, that's not good enough, just revise it a little bit, send it back out and see how that works. And after a while, maybe, 20 or 30 rejections of the same piece, you might have to say, well, maybe I should try poetry rather than the great American novel, or become a playwright, or a serial killer. There's all sorts of opportunities out there. You just move along to the next thing. But for me, I was encouraged, which is more than anybody should be. That's welcome, but what happens is you go ahead and do it then, if someone says you can. So if you're looking for a poetic license, I think Mursalata can give them to you as she wishes. So you can stand in front of the dispensary, and that's where they'll come from.
Okay, I love that. And yeah, I'll just add that to the syllabus, and I'll just give you, not only with your grade, you'll get the license.
There should be an application fee.
So you can also post your questions in the chat or raise your hand. And what I'm going to do is say, hey, so we're kind of talking about how to break in, you know, how to get started. So that's one category. And I saw that Adam, your hand was up with a question. And then I'm going to also ask my colleague, Tony, if you can help me just monitor the chat and we'll go between them. But right now, I'm going to move on to unmute Madam. I just did not get your name right today, Adam, as you can see what I did in the chat. So I'm going to unmute Adam and then Lydia, and then we'll see where we are at that point. So go ahead and see if you can unmute yourself. Nope. I lost you on my, there's so many people on my Zoom screen. I lost, your name just moved completely someplace else. There you are. Okay. See if you can unmute now.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Lynch. Thank you very much for joining us.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. So like I mentioned in my email, you actually met my best friend about a decade ago, and he gave me a copy of Bodies of Motion and at Rest.
Okay.
And so I have a couple questions. Some are related to what you just said. Specifically, you said that you had somebody in your life that was constantly pushing you. And am I correct to assume that that was your father, among, I assume, other people? You were mentioning it in one of your other books, and I can't remember. I have a couple of your audiobooks, and so I can't pull it off the top of my head which book that was, but I was just curious if that was who you were talking about.
Well, my father always sort of encouraged us to pursue our interests. By the same token, he found that the highest and best use of teenagers was to employ them at minimum wage or less. So he would have us work around the funeral home because it kept us out of trouble. He could monitor our habits, and he could pay us out of the corporate bank rather than his after-tax bank. So because of that, of my 8 siblings, I believe all but 2 went into funeral service. So we just admired him. So in the sense of why I became a funeral director, there's no question that my father, and the example he set as someone who, as he said, served the living by caring for the dead. That was sort of his standing, I think the word is raison d'etre. I have that on a calendar someplace. But that's why he became a funeral director. But I had a teacher in college about I don't know what year you guys are in, but I think I was a sophomore in college when I met Michael Heffernan, a native Detroiter, like most of us, an internationally ignored poet, but a marvelous poet, a great poet by my estimation. And after we drank a lot together and talked a lot together, I found his poems on the desk awaiting them being submitted to some magazine, and it just made me think, well, if he can do it, I can do it. He also made me read poetry, and as a now deceased friend once said, read 1,000 books and write one. So I've read some and I've written some, and I feel good about that.
Okay.
So my other question was, what is like your preferred medium? Like, are you a pen and paper kind of guy, or do you just use
I'm a keyboard kind of guy. I have the original typewriter over in the boathouse where I now type postcards with it because I love the clatter of it, Yeah. And then I got an Olympia electronic typewriter. I remember that. I think I wrote my first book of poems on that. I know the first poems I published, I wrote on that. And I never thought I'd get used to the sort of squishy, squashy sound of a computer keyboard, but I love it now. I'm sort of addicted to it, yeah.
What is your personal process in writing, and how do you get yourself in that mindset? Because that's the hardest thing I know a lot of us have spoken about this in the past. How do you get yourself
If I had one thing to tell you that would make you a writer, become a walker. just take a walk every day. Just take a walk and do it alone, and don't have earphones. Just walk. Do it for half hour, an hour, do it for all day. Do what you want, but take a walk every day. The words will come to you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, thank you so much. I think Lydia is recomposing or thinking through her question, and so we had one in the chat. So since we have time, Kelly, I'm just gonna unmute you. Let's give you voice. Go ahead. You should be.
Hi.
Hello, Kelly.
Thank you so much for taking your time to talk with us today. So one thing I noticed in the essay you shared is using lists. So you know, I don't have an example to share right now, but there's, I think, three times at least as I was reading through that you, in your sentence, you used a list. And it actually works. And I was really kind of in awe of that, because I do lists in my writing, and I always end up having to remove them because they become boring or just overwhelming with information. And so I was wondering how you do that.
Well, it's a very good question. I'll tell you how it happened. When I was a boy, I was sent off to the priest to learn how to say the Latin responses to the liturgy for Roman Catholics of the 1950s. And as you know, the Catholics are unimaginative about prayer, but they do these things called litany, which are lists, you know, and they have, you know, a litany of the saints and other things, you know. So listing the names and parts of things became sort of a devotional thing, because no one ever really thought much about Saint Cyprius or, you know, any of those hooligans. They just learned to say, pray for us after they heard their name, you know. So the fact that litany would draw out a response, I think, made me think that nice sort of a measured meter of a litany, when it's being said out loud, would probably sound good in print also. And that if you constructed sentences with commas and semicolons and colons and whatever else you wanted to throw in, but what you were doing was assembling a list of somehow like properties, you know, or circumstances. And I still do that. I mean, I think it's built into the devoutly lapsed Catholic mindset, you know. So get some religion or learn a different language, and get rid of the religion, keep the language, and then listen closely to your own voice.
Thank you. That was really great. I have a second question. Do you mind? Is that okay, Mursalata?
Yes, I don't see any hands right now, and I didn't scope anything in the chat area.
By the way, if we don't have a bunch of questions, I do have, and this is a warning, about a 2-hour poetry reading, just waiting for the right group. And this will do as any other one. You know, I tried on the Rotary Club once and they disbanded. So I would say work up some questions, but work away, Kelly.
Okay. Another question I had, I posted in the chat, or maybe I didn't post this one in the chat. As I was reading your essay, I was thinking about the profession you had as an undertaker, and then the attitude toward death that you were sharing in the essay. And, you know, when I think of people who work at these businesses, I think that they're usually, or at least the way that they present themselves is really careful about how they talk about death, and there's almost a reverence toward the process. And I wondered, as you took this other tone in the essay, did you do this while you were still doing the work as a undertaker? Were you worried that the community you were serving might not still work with you? Was there any clashing happening in those two vocations you had?
You know, I love language. But the best part of language is when it makes sense between strangers, you know? So like, I've noticed this, maybe you have too. Like my grandsons, they went through it. I mean, they might be 10 and 8 now, but when they were, 6 and 4, if you said poop, they listened. If you said shit, they really listened. The thing is, people like real talk, So the dead guy is known to everybody, whereas the dearly departed, you're shuffling through your, brain box to figure out where do you fit, or the loved one. Not always, as we know. So I just found if you talk to people as if you thought they were really listening, they would listen more closely. And the terrible things that attend a death in the family, there is enough gravity to the situation that the words shouldn't be hard to understand. They should be as clear as possible. So I just find that works better for most people, and I think that's true of writing also. You want to be understood, otherwise people fall asleep. They have other things to do,
Okay, well, thank you. Since you put it out there that you've been waiting for that audience, I put something in the chat, everyone. I thought, we have enough time. We might want to be that audience. So if we could take the next 2 questions and then maybe hear some poetry, and then we can bracket it and still have time for more questions.
Well, I'll do one if you do one, but go ahead with the questions,
We're definitely going to do that. So the questions. So up next, I have Jacob and Rachel. I saw your hands, so I am going to unmute you now, Jacob. And remember that I am recording. I posted that in the chat. So if you don't want your loveliness, your face on, you want to keep your cameras off. So you should be able to unmute yourself, Jacob. And then Rachel, you'll be up next.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Jacob.
Hello, Mr. Lynch.
Jacob, can I ask before you start, do you speak Dutch?
No, I do not. I'm actually in German right now. I'm in German class in like 2 hours, so close enough, right? What I was going to ask was, when I was reading your essay, it was going at the very end. I found it very interesting when it talked about how because after the death of someone, the only thing that's left is kind of what people think of him and the ideas associated with him. And the stuff I've been kind of working on and have been kind of interested in has been like the kind of spirituality that you can find, but isn't necessarily tied to any like one religion. It's more of like the ideas associated with that person, that kind of like everyone has like their physical being, and then their thoughts and spirits that go with them. Where do you get the kind of inspiration from? Because I didn't really see much of like religious inspiration when it came to the essay. It didn't really mention anything that you would find in contemporary religion, but it was still like very much. I've never really seen. I don't really see much discussion about death that doesn't also have some like afterlife or thing that is associated with it. But I found what you did was really interesting, and I was wondering what inspired you to think like that. That idea of when somebody dies, the only thing that's left of them is the ideas and thoughts that are associated with them.
I am a devoutly lapsed Catholic, and I have been lapsed for longer than I was devout. And that said, I am religiously literate by on purpose. I'm really interested in how people are. I mean, because religion is from the word for binding, how we are bound together, and how we exercise those bindings, those connections, those attachments. But I do believe, though I am an apostate, well, was it Robert Ingersoll who said, I believe nothing, I know nothing, I deny nothing, I live in hope. I think that's as near to my apostasy as I'll ever get. But I am a member of a fellowship that asserts that the spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. We have to live as if the dead occupy a beingness that's different from ours, but that they can still know our hearts or not. We don't know. There's no way to prove this, but there is, I have this sense that heaven's mezzanine, that floor between us and our cloud of witnesses, as the Presbyterians or Methodists or some of them assert, I always think of that mezzanine, that ground between the living and the dead, is kind of like the space around the courtroom in To Kill a Mockingbird, where Scout and Jim go up to watch their father lose the case against a black man who was falsely accused of tampering with a white woman. And Gregory Peck famously loses the case. And he's gathering his goods together. The children up in the courthouse mezzanine have fallen asleep. And the kindly pastor, who is separated by race from the main floor observers of this drama, this courtroom drama, is up there with his congregants and fellow townspeople who are not white, except for these two children of the defense. And he says, as Gregory Peck exits the courtroom, "Stand up, children, your father is passing." It always takes my breath away. The catalog of beliefs that inform that declarative, that instruction. And you know that this kindly pastor, whose name I'm ashamed that I have forgotten, is a holy man. And as such, he believes in the spiritual realm, and he might have more than 1 foot in it already. He is literally between heaven and the courtroom, which is so earthbound and imperfect. It's just been demonstrated. Anyway, that's how I think of the spiritual world. I do think the dead remain alive in our memories and in our imaginations, and they inform our work sometimes, I think. I posit the mystery anyway.
Yeah, I think that's really good insight into that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. I want to say up next we have Rachel. And Rachel, you should be unmuted. And I just want to give a little preview. Rachel is our guest from another professor's creative writing course. So welcome, Rachel.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi. I just wanted to ask a little bit about your use of insight. We had a chapter in this class talking about how writing can really bring kind of an insight into the human experience. And, I'm looking at examples here, but whenever I remind her that we did substantially with everyone, the woman would grow sullen and a little cranky. And then on the next page.
With everyone, I didn't hear what you were reading.
So this was this was in The Undertaking, and it was talking about former mother-in-law. But whenever I would remind her that we did substantially that with everyone, throw me in a box and throw me in a hole, the woman would grow sullen and a little cranky. And I see that overall, you talk a lot about the hypocrisy of in general, kind of the living, based on the difference between what they idealize and what they want to be remembered for, and what they actually do in their life. But I noticed, like, it's not subtle. It's very clearly out there. And I think you're explaining a good bit, but it doesn't come off as preachy. And as a writer, I'm an explainer. Like, I tend to kind of hammer a point home. And I just wanted to ask a little bit about how you balance being, like, very clearly insightful and, like, talking to people in a very plain manner, but at the same time not kind of hammering a point home too much. Like, how do you figure that out, I guess?
Boy, that's a good question. I think that's the highest and best use of your editor. Because most people regard an editor's job as sort of tampering with genius, you know. I know I always think that if somebody changes a comma, you know, they clearly just don't get it, you know. But I have found over time that if someone puts in the effort to read your work, then what they say about it is really valuable. And my first editor, the man who commissioned the essay that you're referring to, he did so because he had published my first book of poems, and he knew there was no money to be made by publishing a book of poems, and it cost the House of Alfred Knopf quite a bit of money to publish that first book of poems. And so within about 3 days of it having, you know, appeared on the market, he called me at the office and he said, do you ever write anything besides poetry? And I said, well, I could, of course. You know, he said, well, I will publish what you write in a very important literary magazine, which I happen to edit on the side, by which I knew that no one would read it, so I could write what I wanted, and I wasn't getting paid, so I could write what I wanted. So it was, I just said, how long do you want it to be? He said maybe 3,000 or 4,000 words. And that essay you're reading is the essay I wrote for him. And I want to confess this too, because most of us get dressed up in our best suit and walk out into the street thinking we'll get inspired. We don't. You know, we just dodge the traffic and look for, you know, proper sexual partners the way everybody else does. That's what we think about, sex and death. Yeats knew this, and he wrote it. The only thing that we should be thinking about, if we're scholarly, it was his word, but he meant writers, sex and death. For me, it was handy because the dead were everywhere, and I like sex. Most of us do, you know. So, but the fact of the matter is, we won't do anything unless we're told to. And so when a high-powered New York editor said to me, write me something and I'll print it in a really important place, that's like, you know, that's like good stuff. So, but I didn't know what to write. And so I called him back and I said, what do you want? He says, well, I don't care. Tell us what you do. Tell us what it is you do. So now, Rachel, I want you to, you've probably never been to the Rotary Club. But I was the president of the Rotary Club at that time in Milford. There were, you know, and in the Rotary Club, there's only one of every job classification. You know, one, you know, undertaker, one serial killer, one solar panel salesperson. So, and what would happen is if the program chair didn't arrange for the drain commissioner to come by and tell us what they were doing with the drains that year, or the person advancing the millage vote for the library didn't come by to be the program, then they would make somebody in the group, and there were only a few of us, stand up and give what they called a classification speech. And a classification speech was to tell your fellow Rotarians what you do, what it is you do. So when Gordon Lish said to me, just tell us what it is you do, I started it out like a classification speech. Every year I bury a couple hundred of my townspeople. Another 2 or 3 dozen I take to the crematory to be burned. That's what I do. That's what I was doing then. It's changed a lot now. 62% of our dead are burned and a fewer number are buried. That's taken 50 years to change that. But at the time, I just told them what it was I did. And I just kept going from one thing to the next. And naturally, if you are, if nobody's paying you and nobody's going to read it, you can say what you want. And that's how the mother-in-law, may she rest in peace, came up, And she was cranky. And she was always posing, because we are posers, we humans, We're all hypocrites of some kind. I mean, we might be noble and the rest of it, but at some level, we're just posers. We want to be thought better of than we should be. That's why I have a dog. He thinks I'm really cool some days, But I got that little dig in. If that sort of turned the direction of that essay, someone would have said he's got issues with his mother-in-law. But I know that, because here's how writing works. If you get, say, 500 good words into 2 or 3 paragraphs in a day, your first job the next morning is to read them over with a pen that is crossing a lot out and adding in corrections or amendations or whatever it happens to be. You want to fix it. And you would pick up when, the slight insult becomes the ad hominem. And we want to avoid those things unless you mean to do damage. I just worry about hurting people inadvertently. If I want to do damage, I've got weaponized language. We can do that. You can too. That's how we hurt the ones we love. But if you don't want to do it inadvertently, you gotta have an editor. And what writing does to you, Rachel, is it makes you your very best editor. Soon you will be harder on yourself than anyone ever will be.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking your question. I have a question myself. Actually, I just wanted to follow up with something I heard you say about, being told to do something and given this license. And you asked me the same thing. So everyone, we had a phone call earlier this morning, and he asked, well, in the email you sent, you asked, do I write like anything else? And my response was, no, not really. Kind of mainly just write poetry. But in my history, when I was an undergraduate, I wrote 1 short story and I wrote 1 one-act play. And they were so incredibly difficult to do. I would not have ever undertaken them unless I needed money. So I wrote short, so I had a purpose beyond, just trying to see if I can do it. As an undergrad, like most of you, didn't have any money. And I'm like, there's gotta be a way. I keep hearing from people like, I'm a good writer. Like, there's gotta be a way this can help me like this year, as I think I was like a junior or something. And the poetry writing contest and the playwriting contest, they both paid more money. And that is the reason I wrote those 2 things. And I think the short story won first place. I got $500. That was a lot of money. And then the one-act play, which I still do not like to this day, I think I won like $200 or $300. But I've not written anything since because I've not had like that much of a need to be that creative. And I'm looking forward to that. So just having, a place to say, hey, do whatever you want. I think that also comes from a place of like just the purpose and the need for something other. And yeah, so I just want to follow up with that. And then my question that I had, I want to make sure, I'm being selfish now. I wanted to make sure I got my question in. So earlier in this semester, and some of those students they know who they are. So we were in breakout rooms and I was just going around scaring my students, apparently just popping into their breakout rooms, even though I tell them I'm coming into their breakout rooms. It's still somewhat of a surprise. And so it was this one breakout room, but I also heard this sentiment from other students. So we're using this textbook called The Practice of Creative Writing, lots of activities in it and writing projects. And my students were saying like, why are we being asked to tap so much into our real life for creative writing. It's like, because I'm doing this to create some other world, not necessarily, you know, so, and if I'm looking at fiction or science fiction, these other genres, like, how is this going to help me? And I really feel like I failed to answer that question. One, because I'm older and it just makes sense. Like, yeah, this is where you're going to get, even if it becomes some fantastical creature, tapping into the world around you might make sense. So that's my question. It's like, so if we are looking to get away from our real life through this, why should we keep looking at or be forced to return to some sort of inspiration or our fantasy, fiction, poetry, what have you? Maybe?
Well, I just think it's easier. I mean, I think it was Eliot that said, all poets borrow, great poets steal. So the reason I read poetry is because I'm in the market for poetry. I want to steal as much as I can. So, and I don't want to specifically write poetry about, you know, it's not like Facebook in verse, you know, it's not like, you know, the cheeseburger that I really want people to see that I have assembled. But there is, I think, about the writerly life, an impulse to disclose, if not our biography, our humanity. And this is really important. This is really important, that our stories, I think it was Jim Harrison who said, death steals everything but our stories. He was right about that. And if we don't tell our own stories, then some obituarist like moi will tell them for us. But we'll only use so much of the infrastructure as we get from your next of kin or your assemblage of former spouses who gather together to help with the funeral arrangements. And I just think we do this to know ourselves better also. I can't think of any other reason to do it than to advance the inventory we keep having to take of ourselves in order to, you know, to be good in the world, you know. So we don't have to, you know, it's not, there's a difference, see, Mursalata, between privacy and secrecy. And the same fellowship that tells me about the spiritual life is not a theory tells me that anonymity is one of the foundational principles. Privacy is one of the foundational principles. What we hear here, who we see here, remains here, here, we say. But what it means is we're entitled to our own story. But secrecy, not so much. Secrecy is a different fellow. And I think our wellness has to do with how easily we unload our secrets. How easily we notice that our secrets are not that much different from our fellow humans' secrets. And I think writing is one way to do that. Certainly music is one way to do that. Certainly fine art is one way to do that. I think creative people are trying to create a space in which that replicates sort of, you know, the beginnings of our humanity around a fire. Most people slept with one another long before it was fun. They did it because it was warm. You know, you'd survive the night maybe. And there are still a lot of the world that live that way. And I think writing is the same way. This colloquy, well, I'm rambling on, but what I'm saying is self-disclosure, once you do it and the sky doesn't fall, it emboldens you to do it again. So find your worst secret, your most carefully guarded secret, and write about that today. And you'll notice that most of us will wake up again tomorrow and, you know, be going about the important nonsense we do every day, like letting the dog in, letting the dog out, you know, wax the floor or whatever, you know. The sky's not going to fall on your disclosures, but it might make you seem more human to me. And there is something worth doing. So if you do nothing else in this class, exchange your emails and find someone who reads your story with the same dispassionate remove that can tell you that's a bad sentence, or I'd start it here, or I'd quit it there. You know, those are the things you need to know. But if you want to admit to being a serial killer, go ahead. Nobody, you know, it's like the first time I ever went to a meeting and said, my name's Tom, I'm alcoholic. I thought everybody was going to cheer, or, you know, God would speak from out of the clouds. Nothing happened. They all just said, move along, you know. What else is new? So go ahead. Say the worst that could be said. Make sense of it.
Well, thank you. So just by a show of hands, this is to everyone that's on the Zoom in the participants. If you have been laughing at any point hysterically, can you just put a thumbs up so we can see? I'm grateful for mute at some of these, but thank you so much. We are now at, I say thank you because that helps me think about the next time, and I will encounter that the next time when I'm working with students, and I could just play that clip. So
you could put it in your own words and say, I thought of this morning. I promise you, I'm the cute whore who will do anything. What I hear today, I'm taking it. You know, I figure it's payment in kind.
Okay, so everyone, we are at almost 2:05. So that means we still have about 20 minutes left of class. Trying to see if Thomas Lynch has changed his mind about having to do an exchange of poetry, but we're gonna take this one, I see one hand up, I'm gonna take that question, and then let's be that audience a little bit that you were waiting for. That's okay with everyone. By a show of hands, does that sound like a plan? Let's hear something, and then we have.
Yeah, but could we ask if anybody wrote a poem today? I'd like to hear something fresh.
Okay, hands down. I see your hand, Jamie. I know you have a question, so I'm going to lower hands. Does anyone just answer that question? Can you ask it again, Mr. Lynch?
Yeah, who wrote a poem today? I can't see hands, but maybe
Yeah.
you can.
No hands up. How about, do you need more time, like the last week?
Well, we could do that too, or I could give an assignment, and
Okay.
And they can report to you, say, in a week's time.
Well, you already gave that one, which was a big one, that right, the secret one. So we might want to light.
Oh yeah, well, yeah.
All right, so that's.
Yeah, we'll just see what happens.
Oh, wait a minute, Adam. So do you have I saw your hand up, Adam. Is that a hand up for a poem? Okay, so what I heard earlier you say, Mr. Lynch, was that you had a poetry reading ready for a certain audience and we could be that audience?
Yeah, well, you could call me Tom because we've been chatting a long time now. And, you know, pretty soon.
Hey, Tom, I'll do that.
And Mr. Lynch gets troublesome after a while. He'll send a car with a stretcher in it. So.
Okay.
You want to hear a poem?
So yeah, you said earlier that you had something that was waiting for an audience, and we are just.
Well, I have books of them. I have, yeah.
And then you threw something in there and said, "I'll do one if you do one."
Yeah, you're going to do one after I do this, and then Adam. Anybody else committed poetry out there in the last, say, month and a half that would like to read us something?
I'm gonna really need
during the pandemic.
I'm gonna need people in my class to just at least raise your hand that you created something in the last month and a half, considering it's a creative writing class. Okay, so all right, now we put your hands down, and so we're gonna hear from Mr. Oh, I'm sorry.
You're gonna call me Tom, and I'm gonna read this poem.
And then me, and then Adam, and Lydia, your hand is up. Are you going to share something? All right.
All right. This is a short. I don't know.
Jamie, your question. I'm gonna Jamie, type it in the chat because I can't. We are going to now listen, and I'm gonna read your chat message to me.
Poor Jamie. I think he needs to be on mute. All right. Here's a poem. Here's a poem called I Ams for the Day of Burial. I don't know. This is an old poem. I Ams are those things that go da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. Just think Edna St. Vincent Millay or Shakespeare. There's a lot of I Ams in both of them. Of all our private parts, the heart knows best that love and grieving share the one body and keeps a steady iambic tally of this life's syllables, stressed and unstressed. Our pulse divided by our breathing equals pleasure measured in pentameters, pain endured in oddly rhyming pairs, sadness, gladness, sex, and death, nuptials, funerals. Love made and love forsaken, each leaves us breathless and beatified, more than the sum of parts that lived and died of love or grief, both leave the heart broken. There you go.
Okay, thank you. We can clap our hands, right? We have these abilities.
Okay.
On our end to
Now you.
Me, I was thinking, shouldn't I go last? Like have the students make sure.
All right.
Okay. All right. So yeah, you have that clap hand feature. So we know that. So then we have Adam and Jamie. That's what Jamie was trying to communicate. Going to share, and then I'm going to bring it up at the end, and then we'll see where we go from there.
And Rachel too.
Oh, okay. And Rachel. All right. So let's do this. Go ahead. We're going to do Adam. I'm going to unmute you. Just keep in mind that we are sharing time, so we're not reading the novel.
No, so this is something that popped into my head last night because I was walking through a store and the song Special came on. Like, I don't even know who sings it. Probably Alicia Keys. But to be better, greater, or otherwise different from what is usual. That is special. Am I special? No, I'm not special. Different? Sure. But I'm not special. Great? No. That is merely just a small part of my name. I do not epitomize that term. I do not live it. I am merely well enough, and that is okay for me. What is special? What truly makes one special? Is it how they tend to their life? Is it how they comb their hair or brush their teeth? I do those little circles too, twice a day, once in the morning and once in the evening, but I am not special. I have things in my life that are special. My daughter, sure. But that might be a bit too obvious of an answer. It's a bit too on the nose. I consider my life itself to be pretty mundane, yet I'm an oversharing person. It is what it is. I am not special. I'm not a great student, although I study. It is not ever really for school because I've never enjoyed the setting of a school. I love to learn, and that should really be that. It does not matter what the topic is. I will regularly spill down a rabbit hole of new information and gladly gobble it up as though it was my first meal in a century. But being curious and starved for knowledge rarely makes one special.
Good man for you, Adam.
Thank you. All right. All right, Jamie. Everyone else should be muted. Jamie next, and then Rachel, and then I'll bring up the end of this impromptu open mic Zoom open mic. You're up, Jamie.
Is he unmuted?
He is. Unmute now, Jamie. We're having muting. There you go.
Yeah, I have no idea why that happened. Hold on. Mine, I will warn, is not from my point of view. Okay, I call it what lies behind the face of fear. What do you fear? Do you fear the spiders that crawl on your body and into your mouths and eyes? Do you fear the dog who snarls its teeth and barks like a hellhound? Or do you fear the creeping hands of time that slowly choke your life away? No, many of you fear what is different than you. The black teenager in a hoodie coming home at night. The transgender woman who dares to flaunt who she is. The woman of authority who dares to be in that position. You also fear me, not because of what I have done or what I will do, but because of what I am. Because I was born of, well, sex, I'm having trouble pronouncing it today, between a sinner and sin herself. Because I dared to seek out my father. Because I dared to stand up to my father, the bullying king, fat on his own ego. Because I spilled Danish blood in the process. Because that fraud Beowulf ripped off my arm in an ambush. Beowulf used his insignificant victory to con his way to the throne. And what did he do with that power? Did he better his kingdom or his subjects? No. The only thing he did was fatten himself up and nearly get his kingdom burned to the ground because of his greed. I helped him fix that problem, and yet he is remembered throughout the ages as the great hero Beowulf, and I am remembered as the hideous monster Grendel. And for a time, I accepted that role. I decided if I was going to be a monster, if that was my fate, I was going to be the worst damn monster of all time. Me and my mother, we wreaked havoc on you humans. From the assassination of a certain archduke to the sinking of a certain passenger boat. We did our best work together as mother and son. All it took for you humans to kill each other was the tiniest push. A few words of encouragement to some foolish young Serbians, a few strips of dynamite on the side of a ship. You almost seem to like killing each other. And if I'm being honest, there was a time I thought I liked hurting you. However, as time went on, I noticed something. I hurt many of you. Hell, I was good at it. And yet, it brought me no long-term joy. It got almost boring, depressing even. You all hated each other so much. I actually came to pity you, so many of you, so lost, so much like me. And then something changed. My story had a twist, and like every good story, it involves a girl, and she was something special. She was beautiful, and it wasn't her long black hair or dark ebony skin. No, it was what was inside her, an everlasting light. She was different than most of you. She didn't care for violence or suffering. She only sought to help every living creature, everyone, whether male or female, black or white, even me. She showed me something I didn't know I had, a heart. She appealed to my better nature to help people instead of hurting them. And I couldn't help but wonder to myself, could this be my purpose, my destiny? Not to lead humanity into damnation, but instead to be your savior. And then there came a great fire, flames and smoke, high as the sky, screaming and shouting and crying. And I decided to test that theory. It was easy to rush in and grab the screaming little girl and get her out. And once I did, I felt something I'd never felt before, joy. And so I began helping you more and more. And as I did, I felt happy for the first time in my life. I was truly fulfilled. Unfortunately, this did not please Mommy Dearest, not one bit. She decided this couldn't be me. This wasn't me. No son of hers would put himself anywhere near danger for a filthy human. It had to be the girl. Yes, the girl. I tried to talk her out of it. Tried to show her the light, but she didn't listen to me. She wouldn't. She found her home. I pleaded with her, begged her not to do this, but she wouldn't listen. She never did. She said it was for my own good, that when she was gone, I would see the light. I would see the truth. I tried to stop her with every fiber of my being, but what can I say? Chloroform is a hell of a drug. I woke up hours later. The sky was black with night. Not a single star in the sky. That's when I knew that the brightest light I had ever known had been put out, never to shine again. The scene was absolute carnage. It wasn't a quick kill. Every bit of anger she had against my long dead father, against the God that abandoned us, and I suspect against me. All that rage, all that hatred, expelled in one unforgivable act of passion and violence. And just like that, all my former feelings of rage, of hatred, but this time, for the first time in my very long life, it wasn't aimed at you. It was aimed at my own blood, my own mother. And unlike you humans, I couldn't even kill her. The advantage of being on God's bad side. I couldn't kill her, and she couldn't kill me. How? How could I avenge my light if I couldn't kill her? And then it came to me. What? What is the best revenge? The answer to that question is simple. The best revenge is living well. And so I dedicated myself to making my mother's life unwell. And every time my mother made a move on any of you humans, I was there. The Titanic was first of our many skirmishes. It ended with my mother crucified to a wall with pipes sinking to the bottom of the North Atlantic. Many more fights ensued. She'd win some, I'd win more, but then then a funny thing happened. I started helping people even when my mother wasn't involved, and it felt good. And so I became a guardian of humanity. And about 7 years ago, I became a father, sorta. A young child, no name, no identity. Heaven wanted him dead. Hell wanted to manipulate him, as my mother manipulated me to her own ends. I refused to allow that to happen. Not again! And so me and another lost soul were able to save the infant. She took him and raised her as her own. Hell, I did some of the raising, I must admit. And the kid, when I look at him, I see so much of her, so much of my light. Oh God, I'm talking like one of you, a human. And that just goes to show you, if someone like me can learn to love and to nurture, maybe there's hope for you all after all, maybe for all of us.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Now you can see all my private chats to you. All right, we have...
oh crap, I am so sorry.
We have about 10 minutes left, but we are gonna get to... Rachel was next. So let me see. I've unmuted you. You should be able... There you go, yes.
I don't think I can beat that poetry reading. I actually never read my poetry out loud, so if this is off, I apologize. This poem is called Of Calluses and Clay. Footsteps in clay on the riverbank are all the evidence remaining of me. Though the muddy silt dries to dust and clings to my thighs, leaving streaks like spray tanner, my skin has ceased to tingle in response. I am numb. The sun that shined upon my face still glimmers on the water, brightens the rapids and blinds me, but it offers me no comfort. I am cold. Children's laughter is a cacophony. Their joy collides with my world, rattles and grinds like misfitted gears, making me shudder. I try to feel. I submerge myself in frigid river water to emerge to wind that gives me goosebumps. I lie in the afternoon sun until my skin reddens, crackles, splits, and shits. I run barefoot on sand, and concrete and gravel, and on ice. I run my fingers through sand and clay and river water and the splintered strands of my own hair.
Thank you, Rachel. Okay, so one person left, that's me. And I am going to do a haiku, so shouldn't be too long if I don't make my explanation of the haiku take a long time, right? So let's see. I'm going to share my screen because there's a photo that goes along with the haiku. So I want you to be able to see that. Hopefully my screen is being shared. Let's see. My Zoom disappeared here for a second. Okay, so this haiku is part of a collection of about 17 or 18, and it's the title of the collection is called Haiku Middle Passage. And this art piece is, the author's name is there, and it's called Haiku's Middle Passage, and this is the first one in the set. I taught creative writing a long time ago, and I wasn't really ready for it, and I used haiku as one of the forms of poetry, and my students just ate me up. They're like, "This is easy. Anybody can write haiku." I'm like, "No, this is not easy if we're doing it right." And so to make sure that I gave myself the hardest assignment ever, I decided to do some history, and I wrote a set of haiku about the Middle Passage, which is during the slave trade. So the Middle Passage is when people were taken from their homes and in different parts of Africa and traveled across the sea to then be enslaved in a whole bunch of other places. And so this is about the time on the water. So it's me trying to re-envision that. So as I said, the explanation is longer than haiku. But it took me about 2 years to complete the first 13 of these. So here, Europe yanked one thigh. Africa held the other, red as el agua. And there it is on the screen. I will mute myself and thank you all for participating in that. We have about 6 minutes and it's back to you, Tom. No, why are you muted? You should be able to unmute yourself. Oh, wait, I'm gonna have to, wait, don't talk, stop, you're muted. Try it out, there you go.
Yeah, I was just saying my thanks to Rachel and Jamie and Adam and to you. And when you were reading your haiku, it struck me how connected poetry, I've often thought, is sort of the mother's milk of language. Without it, nothing else happens. So the reason we have novels and stories and essays and one-act plays, in many ways, I think comes from our impulse to poetry. I'm not telling you anything you don't know when I say that for a long time, poetry is how the news of the world got from one place to the other, you know? And the reason it not only had to be memorable, but it had to be memorizable, which is why we developed rhyme and meter, you know, because, and the meter sort of helped us walk along from one station to another in our journey. And the meter helped us to keep pace, and the rhymes helped us to remember what comes next. So if we said oyster, we knew that 2 or 3 or 4 lines later, we'd have to say something that rhymed with oyster, like cloister, you know, and the acoustic pleasure of that is what got us going. The other thing is that the news of the day all related. What was happening, your talk about the Middle Passage is so instructive because it was a middle passage of transporting chattel goods or chattel people from one reality to another one. And we can look at it in historical terms and whatever we want to do, but I just think it's so important to know that poetry, without poetry, there would be no record of any of it. I think poets keep the record of the world. And it's so important that we do that, because without that, we're left to fictionists and other people who just make shit up. Now, that stuff is good too, because it carries the news of the world too. Most creative writing does. Most art does. And I want to advance the notion that all art communes with all other art. So that Mursalata, your haiku, and Jamie, your citation of Middle English terrors in Grendel and the other fellow, the guy who got the title piece, that carries news of the world in a way that has to be done. So how many of you know Ta-Nehisi Coates' work? Yeah. So, but he got his title. He got his sort of paradigm from James Baldwin. You know, the notion of sort of constructing an epistle, a letter to his son. But he got the title and the news from a poem by Richard Wright called Between the World and Me, which has to do with coming on to a dead body, a horrifically dead body in the woods on his walk. And that's an explicit way that all art communes with all other art. But I want to say that it really, I think I'm going to pass the time here, but if you have not, every time we come across a poet we didn't know, it's a gift. So take a chance, read someone you never heard of. If they're poets, the chances are really good that they'll never be heard of, you know, because so we pay so little attention to poetry. This is a book that I got last week, and I only got it because the week before I got in the mail a book that I had ordered a month before, because the anthologist is a man I taught with briefly at Emory. I didn't teach with him, but I knew he was there. I kept trying to engineer a chance meeting with him. I never did. But when he anthologized 250 years of African-American poetry, I thought, what could go wrong? So I sent for the book, charged it to my office, and here it came. And you know, one morning, having nothing else to do, I came across this poem by Nicole Seeley on page 960, which made me think, if she can write this poem, possibly she writes a bunch more like it. Thus the book. She can write a bunch more like it. And every one of you that are committing poetry, I say, go and send some more.
Tony, can you just say hello or something as my other colleague who's on here?
Absolutely. I was just typing a comment, but thank you so much, Mr. Lynch. That was brilliant. I was starting to type that. I first heard your work and started reading your work probably 20 years ago, and it has so many echoes today in the time of COVID. Just reading it again, I was just so struck by how much of your insights into the Gulf War era just resonate today. And yeah, I would love to, if we had more time, I would ask you to speak about poetry in the era of COVID, but thanks so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you. Again sometime.
Well, One second, Jamie. Is there anyone else who hasn't had a chance to say something that you want to take this time before all of us who had repeats keep going at it for a little bit?
I still have that question, if it's okay.
Yes, please. I am so sorry, Lydia. You were supposed to, like, you know, not do something more.
I just wanted to make sure I was being polite, making sure everyone had a chance to share their passions and words.
Well, you had plenty of time to get it all organized and ready to deliver.
Yes. So as what your colleague was saying about like poetry in quarantine, I like re-sparked my love for poetry my senior year last year. And with quarantine, I had all of this time to write. And now I feel like we have like settled in the pandemic and I'm just in this huge writing rut. And I guess I was just gonna ask you, how do you find comfort in yourself? I know I had all this time to reword my question, but now I'm nervous again. I just like, do you have any strategies for getting out of writing ruts, or how you find comfort in this turmoil that we have in this world? To still thrive creatively.
When you say writing rut, Lydia, are you talking about writer's block, or you're stuck in a rut where all you can do is write?
I definitely have both of those. Maybe not all I can do, maybe not a constant writing right now, but I'm in this rut in which I'm like a big poet. All I write is poetry. I can only write one-liners and I can only write baby stanzas. And it's like I can write novels in my head. I write poetry while I work, and while I drive, I like have all these concepts in my head, but as soon as I get to my computer or as soon as I like write something down, it's like all of my ideas are just empty. My mouth is just dry and I don't know how to get out of it.
And do you want a formula for breaking that?
Yes, please.
Okay, write this down.
Mm-hmm.
Pick one inanimate object in your space, in your house, your room, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Pick one inanimate object, then look out a window
Mm-hmm.
and find an animate object.
Mm-hmm.
I would avoid children, just,
Okay.
but otherwise inanimate object.
Right.
And let's see. Then I'm trying to remember this form. And then pick one. You must write. You must give yourself a formal constraint.
Okay.
I would suggest, at minimum, a sonnet.
Okay.
And the sonnet must have lines that go to more than 10 syllables or just 10 syllables. And you have to throw in a few rhymes.
Yes.
So a sonnet requires 14 lines. I'm giving you a coupon good for write as many as you want and call it a sonnet. And but be sure they rhyme and be sure they're each 10 or 11 syllables, somewhere in that vicinity.
Yeah.
And and the last couplet has to end in the same word.
Yes. Yes.
There,
Okay.
that's it.
Thank you. I will do that.
Yeah. And if you can include the word basilica, there is a real bonus to it. Okay?
I will pop that in there. I will try my best.
All right.
I love a good challenge. Thank you.
You bet. But anyway, I guess I just want to say thank you for listening to the blather, and thank you for the work you're going to be doing in the fullness of time. I can say I knew them when.
Well, thank you. Everyone who's still on, remember, you leave when you need to. Just don't forget to have your exit comments. And this is a good opportunity to leave a question too. If you still have something, I will go through that and see if Tom will answer those offline. If you want to hang on for a few more minutes, I'm making it so that you can unmute yourself. But then if you wanted to give a verbal thanks or something. But other than that, we are at 2:32 and I want to honor your classroom time.